Well, welcome to you all. Last week we had a great session about finding out more about the Benin bronzes and the possibilities of some of those being returned. Can you all switch your microphones off, please? Right, okay, thank you very much indeed. So last week's session was really interesting, and that was the 25th session of the Black History Lunchtime Conversations. It's a remarkable record that we've managed to keep going. Well, we're into season 3 now, and we're getting planning what we can do and what we'll be able to explore, because quite clearly there is an awful lot of Black history and African history, as well as the history of the rest of the world, to fit in with all of this. So what we're going to do today is that we've invited John Evans, who is now the curator of the Newtown Textile Museum in Newtown, Wales. And he's been exploring the story of Thomas Davis and a very interesting artifact, a golden chalice. So John, I think if I just hand over to you and ask you to tell us about the research you've been doing and why you took a particular interest in this, because it's a really fascinating story and leads us into various different strands of Black history. So thank you, that's looking good, Simon. So that's beautiful. Okay, over to you then, John.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and good morning or good afternoon or good evening or whatever it is, wherever you are, to all of you. I was introduced to Thomas Davis a few months ago, quite by accident, and really as a result of joining Liz's Breton online meetings, really. I just was doing a Google search on things, and I came across Thomas Davis. And since then, really, it's taken over my life, strangely enough. So here we are. There's the gold chalice. It's now in the National Museum of Wales in Cardiff, but for over 300 years, it was part of the ceremonial plate of St Mary's Church in Welshpool in mid-Wales. For those who don't know it, Welshpool is a small market town, about 30 miles west of Shrewsbury, and just 12 miles away from where I'm living. It's significant in its own right because it's one of only 30 surviving examples of British-made gold plate of the 17th century. But what makes it fascinating for me is the inscription, which you can see there on the plate. Now, I'm not a Latin expert, but 3 things jump out of it for me straight away. First of all, the name, Thomas Davis. Further along, there is Welshpool, as I said, just down the road from where I'm living. And there's a date at the bottom, April the 9th, 1662. But what it becomes fascinating, really, when the Latin is translated into English, this is the inscription on it. It was a gold chalice presented to the Church of St Mary in Welshpool to give thanks by Thomas Davis for God saving his life after a perilous time in West Africa as the agent general of the English in West Africa. And it's not just a gold chalice, it's a chalice of Guinea gold, the purest gold you could get at the time. So it's a fascinating relic, really. And I don't know about you, but the first thing that came into my mind when I read the inscription was West Coast of Africa, 17th century, the triangular trade. He's got to be connected with slavery, surely. So that was where I started. I did some more Google research and found a couple of articles, one written in 1935, another one written just a few years ago by the keeper of gold plate in the museum in Cardiff. And the story is, as Liz saying, quite fascinating. I put this slide up really because it sums up the ambivalence that perhaps historians in Wales have with the British Empire. Certainly in my lifetime, there's been a resurgence in interest in the history of Wales. Usually the medieval period, but really Wales's relationship with the empire is a little bit suspect. I think the Welsh generally like to think themselves more as the exploited rather than exploiters. But what the chalice tells us is that Welshmen were involved, perhaps in slavery, at best, in creating part of the English Empire, as it was called in the 17th century. So West Africa and Thomas Davis. This is Fort Kynant in modern day Ghana, but what was then known as the Gold Coast. And it was here that Davis spent about 15 months between January 1662 and April 1663. He had been appointed as what was called a factor by the court of the East India Company with a salary of £30 per annum. In exchange for that, he had to place a bond of £500 with the East India Company. To give you some idea of how much that was in 17th century terms, that had a buying power of about £52,000. So it was a sizable bond that he had to come up with. Now, because of the high mortality rate in West Africa amongst Europeans, he quickly was raised from just an ordinary factor, an ordinary merchant, to first chief factor, and then the principal agent of the East India Company in Africa. This is the Coronation, the ship that he sailed from London on November the 8th, 1661, a 400-ton ship. And it arrived in the Gold Coast on January the 25th, 1662. This is not a picture of the coronation itself, but it's a typical 17th century East India man of the time. Had a crew of about 70, and it weighed about 400 tons. And this is the ship's manifest. An interesting cargo and an international cargo. Iron, possibly from England. 7,000 pieces of Indian cloth. So ironically, cloth had been exported from India to London, where it was held by the East India Company, and it was then retransported back to West Africa. 124 chests of old sheets, probably from the Netherlands. Apparently, the West Africans liked these European-made sheets. It kept them warm during the cold winter nights. 85 pieces of long cloth, brown and white, possibly Indian, possibly English. Carpets, again, probably from India. 6 chests of muskets, possibly from Italy, or again from the Low Countries. 3 barrels of Dutch knives and casks of pewter. A sizable cargo and quality as well. This wasn't any rubbish. This was real quality stuff. What did I do then? There we are. No Welsh planes on board then.
No, but interestingly, the fabric that was brown and white cloth could easily have come from Wales.
It could have, yes, yeah, and we certainly do know that that Welsh planes were carried on other ships of the East India Company. 17 ships went out by the East India Company between 1657 and 1663, and there were Welsh planes on some of these. Yeah, but look at the value of the cargo: £16,566, 15 shillings and sixpence, a modern day equivalent to something like £1.75 million. So
Johnny, So, excuse me interrupting, are you still expecting your PowerPoint to be showing?
Oh, is it gone?
Simon?
Sorry. Hold it.
Simon?
I think I'm here. You just need to restart it.
Do I? Can you see?
Not just at the moment, but we're looking.
Okay. Let me just
It's
see.
also interesting what you were saying while you're sorting that out about the Indian cloth, that apparently the British wouldn't allow the Indian cotton into Britain, and it was kept in bonded warehouses. And then it was then used to ship out to African countries. Thank you very much indeed. We're looking hopeful. Quite sure where this is. Doesn't look
Can you
like
see
Wales.
Can't see the presentation. Can see your
Wales on a very sunny day.
Gosh, it's
Hold
dry
it.
there.
Can you see it now?
Yes, there we are.
Yeah,
Coming
there
back
we
with
are.
a favour. Okay, put it on full screen, will you?
Sorry, yeah.
That's all right. This is all about improving our skills. This is.
Certainly is.
Sharing, yeah.
Yeah, so the big question then, really, we've got a connection between Thomas Davis and West Africa. He was obviously trading things. Was he trading this for slaves, or was it something else? Well, the important thing to remember is he's working for the East India Company. He wasn't working for the Guinea Company or the Royal Company of Adventurers trading into Africa. These two companies were notorious for their dealings in the trade, in the slave trade. As I said, the East India Company had been granted trading rights on the coast of West Africa, but only for those few years between 1657 and 1663. And the East India Company, as its name suggests, was interested only in trade in the Far East, not with the Atlantic trade. West Africa was a source for the East India Company of two important things, namely the gold and ivory. And these two commodities were used to purchase the luxury goods, the silks, the spices, etc., from India. And as that quotation shows you there, in 1660, the East India Company had actually expressly forbidden their factors from working in the trade in the slave trade, rather. Mm-hmm. So it's highly unlikely that Thomas Davis was directly involved. Although we have to say that as a factor, he could have dabbled in it in his own right, really. So, but certainly officially, he was not involved in dealing with trade, in dealing with slaves. So that's the end of the story, is it? Mm-hmm. He was there for 15 months, came home, glad to be alive after, braving the elements of the Atlantic, corsair pirates, disease on the Gold Coast. He got back and he presented this chalice to Welshpool Church to give thanks to God for his safe return. But it's not the end of it. In fact, we have to travel another 145 miles down the road from Welshpool in Mid Wales to Buckinghamshire to find this memorial plaque in the church in Lathbury. And it's commemorating Richard Davis of Kynant in the county of Montgomery. And the church was the church of Richard Davis's son, Isaiah Davis. He was the minister of the parish. And surprise, surprise, Isaiah Davis was the brother of Thomas Davis. And what the cenotaph tells us there is that Thomas actually had this cenotaph erected there in memory of his father, Richard Davis. So there's the Welshpool connection. And it's quite clear that he was a very proud Welshman, because at the bottom there he says, it's a memorial that any Cambria Britons can notice as they pass by. So we've suddenly got a family for Thomas Davis. We've got a father at least, and we've got a brother. And that's his house. That's where Thomas was brought up, Kynant, just a mile outside Welshpool, still in existence today, which is wonderful. And I think that Kynant was a part of the estate of the Herberts of Powys Castle. So the Davis family were tenants of the Herberts. And the Herberts, during the English Civil War, were royalists. And we've got a third bit of evidence for Thomas Davis. This is his will of 1668. And again, not very easy to read. It is in English, but on this first page of the will, three important things stand out there. There's Thomas's name, if you can just about make it out.
Mm-hmm.
And at the bottom, if you look very carefully, that says the Parish Church of Welshpool. So we're dealing with the same man again. And then the third wonderful bit of information there, I don't know whether you can make that out. It says Thomas Davis of the island of Barbados. So he's been in West Africa. He's also in Barbados. Wonderful. The will itself is a marvelous document, really, because it runs to 8 pages long. It has 2 codicils, 2 amendments to the will, and it names 58 people in it, either as people who have been given bequests or are witnesses to the will or are executors. 23 of those 58 people are family members. And so, from the will, it's possible to create Thomas's family tree. This is my first attempt at it. There's Thomas, and there's his wife, Mary. And you can see that Mary had a previous husband, William Peed, and that marriage had produced 4 children. It didn't look as though Thomas had any children himself. But this is the interesting thing. This is what I really gleaned from the will. His brother Edward Davis, his 3 children there, including a girl called Damaris, who was married to a man called William Sandiford. That's quite an interesting thing to remember, William Sandiford. His other brother, Major Hugh Powell, and his son, Francis Powell, the 2 Raymonts there, and the 4 Peeds. They were all, I think anyway, they were all resident in Barbados. So Thomas Davis, rather than just a lone adventurer, was actually part of a family group that looked as though they went out to Barbados. And I think they probably went out to Barbados sometime in the late 1640s or early 1650s, because we do know that in a will in Barbados of 1651, Thomas Davis appears as a witness. So it's quite clear he'd been in Barbados for quite a long time. The map you can see there is the first printed map of Barbados in 1657. And Thomas was actually arriving in the island. If he was arriving there around about the 1650s, he was arriving at a very important time. Barbados itself had only been claimed by the British, or the English rather, in 1624, and the first settlement took place in 1627. But by the 1640s, Barbados had become the principal sugar-producing island in the Caribbean. This map is interesting, I think, for a number of reasons. First of all, 1657, just so early on, we've already got some pretty stereotypical imagery of slaves here. Obviously, those are a couple of runaways being chased by their master, perhaps. The other thing which is interesting about the map is that it's interesting and it's frustrating, I suppose. You can see all those names there. You probably can't read them. but they're the names of all the principal plantation owners in the island. As I said, it's frustrating because Thomas Davis's name doesn't appear there, but that one there, again, you can't probably see the name. It actually says Sandiford. Do you remember from the family tree?
Mm-hmm.
The Maris was married, we think, to William Sandiford. And Sandiford was one of a number of large plantation owners. He owned more than 200 acres of land, 200 acres of sugar plantation in the island. Many of the names on the list in his will can be found also on this map too. So Thomas was sort of connected to a number of leading families, leading sugar plantation families on the island. So it sounds to me as though Thomas was, in fact, a plantation owner himself. And we do know that obviously his will actually bequeaths something like £1,000 to various people. And the residue, the estate itself, went to his wife, Mary. And we do know from Mary's son, Thomas's will, that Mary was still alive in the late 1660s. And there is a reference there to the fact that she has in dower lands, houses, and Negroes. So that to me says that was Thomas Davis's estate. So he was a planter and he was a slave owner. I think that's about as far as I got, unfortunately, at the moment with my researches. I'd like to delve further into it and see what else I can find. Particularly, can we find any more evidence of his time in Barbados? It's clear, though, that Thomas was one of a number of almost forgotten people who were involved in creating the British Empire and was involved in slavery. This quotation here is from an 18th century Anglesey writer, which I think sums up the feeling at the time: Welsh fortune hunters preferring to rummage around in the West and East Indies for money rather than going a couple of 100 yards underground in our own land. He did a lot, perhaps, for other areas, but not for his own country. Two mysteries certainly do remain. Do you remember the quotation or the inscription on the cup? Apparently it was presented in April 1662. Why that date? Because in April 1662, Thomas was just 3 months into his role as factor in West Africa. So why is that date so significant? Why didn't he put the date of his return in 1663? Perhaps it tells us that he may have been struck down by malaria or something in Africa and survived that early on in his time out there, and perhaps he was giving thanks to that particular event. We don't know. The other mystery is that quotation there, which is from the preamble of the codicil which he wrote in 1666 to his will. Since it has pleased God to call me forth upon a public employment where it may end my days. Sounds another risky undertaking he's going on to, isn't it? But we don't know. It would be lovely to find out that answer. But for now, it's just a mystery. Okay, thank you.
Well, John, that's absolutely fascinating. And John's been talking to me, I don't know, over the Zoom or the email or whatever, and telling me about this story. And I'm quite fascinated. And you have written a paper about the story, haven't you, John?
Yeah, I have written. Really, all the paper does is it just reviews the written literature on it to date, really. And I need to add more to that, I think. Yeah, but
well, one of the things that we're hoping is that we'll be able to create a website where we'll have articles, and we would love to include that article if it's all right. But you're always welcome to update it
Yeah.
as and
It,
when you
it is a working in progress, I think, really. Yeah, but I'd like to write a lot more, I think.
Well, I think this is fascinating. Now, I'm not going to insult you by suggesting you're not a historian, because you were a history teacher, so presumably, did you study history at university?
Yes, yeah, I taught history for 38 years, so yeah.
Well, but you also now, if you like, a community research person, undertaking this on a voluntary basis. And what's interesting is that this series, the Black History Lunchtime Conversations, started with 3 of us who were involved in doing what we call community research. And this fits into that category very well. And I think it's a really important element. So thank you so much for presenting that. And we've got Jim saying thank you and Caroline saying thank you in the chat. So that's brilliant. So as Simon was looking with colleagues in Nottingham, and I see that Norbert's joined us as well. So Norbert's stories about, first of all, George Africanus from Wolverhampton, and then the next piece of research you were doing was into the story of Stanley. Now, Helen also researched the story of Stanley and his wife, and Helen, you developed that as a book, The Bumblebee and the Butterfly, or the other way around, The Butterfly and the Bee. An excellent read, really fascinating.
Can I just say that, thanks very much, John. That was really interesting. I was actually in Welshpool the other day, coming back from South Wales, but I've been on another Zoom call this morning, which was an auction, and there was a piece of Dorothy Tennant's artwork for sale in the auction, which originally had been sold in 1888 for £50, and it realised 1800. I didn't get it. My bidding would have been a fraction of that. But it was just interesting that artwork by Dorothy Tennant, Stanley's wife, is actually still coming up at auctions. So it was just something I thought you might be interested in, Liz.
Very interested, because this is all very relevant, isn't it? You know, how valuable are artifacts that are part of Black history and our wider history. So that's really, really lovely. Thank you for that. Okay, I've got to, so what I'm saying basically is that I'm really interested now in exploring the different ways that Black history is being told and African history is being told. So I think we can list up a whole lot of ways, and in a few minutes we're going to be talking to Bunmi from Canada and hearing about the wonderful work that you're doing. I've mentioned earlier about Chris and his blogging of, not blogging, his sharing on social media of information about different characters and different achievements of Black people in history. But just back to your presentation, John, I wonder if there's anybody who's got any questions or comments that they want to add. So I'm looking at David.
Yes, that was tremendous. And I think there's something very powerful about focusing on an individual object from a single church, and yet when in the way you've unearthed its history, it tells us so much about global history, and that's very powerful. You said that it was now in the National Museum of Wales. Now, I wondered how they were presenting it and whether you felt the way in which it's presented does justice to the way in which it resonates across the world.
You know, that's a really interesting question. To my shame, I have to say I didn't know it was there. It was because I just happened to find it on the internet. So the first thing that's going to happen when the museum does open, I think, is for me to go down and have a look at it. Apparently, it's supposed to be taking pride of place, but it would be very interesting to see how it is presented. I have to say, I think probably, I hope anyway, that it is presented very well, because, as I said, one of the people who've written about it is the curator of that section of the museum. So It'll be fascinating to see, I think.
I don't know how many people listen to the Neil McGregor's series, The History of the World in 100 Objects, and this seemed to me to fall into that category of objects that you could tell the history of the world with.
It should. Yeah, I think you're dead right, isn't it? It's just you're focusing on that one aspect, and it tells you so much. I mean, even the material it's made of, Guinea gold. It's amazing to think that just from there, it does touch so many different lives and so many different experiences.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. I think it's interesting for me that it links the East India Company with the Royal West African Company. Was that the right name for it?
Yeah, the Royal Company was set up straight after the Restoration in 1660, and basically it was made up of a bunch of royalist sycophants. And right from the word go, their main objective was to make as much money out of slaves as possible. They really did turn it into an industry.
Right, and it's interesting though that you also found that quote saying that the East India Company weren't focusing on
the slave, yeah,
and trading slaves. Yeah. Very interesting indeed.
It's actually there is within the East India Company records there is one letter written, and we don't know who it was written by, but it was written during the time that Thomas Davis was out there, and there was an order to send 20 Africans to Africa. They weren't to go as slaves, they were to go voluntarily. But the letter states, we're not sending them because it would mean they would be separated from their wives and children. And that would not be good. I think that's a really telling remark.
Now, the request for
that was yeah, because the East India Company had a factory in St. Helena. England. Yeah. From West Africa down to St. Helena in the South Atlantic.
Right.
Yeah, and the factors refused to send them because it'd mean breaking up their family units. Now, if that was written by Thomas Davis, and some people think it was, it's an interesting sort of paradox, isn't it? On the one hand, it looks as though Thomas Davis was a plantation owner in Barbados with slaves, and yet in West Africa, he showed this very sort of humane side of his character. So to me, that it's just a fascinating sort of paradox.
Very interesting. Just remind me, who's the person at Cardiff Museum then who wrote about?
Oh gosh.
Was it the guy on that picture who wrote the book?
No. No. Oh, I'll have to send you the.
That would be interesting because it's interesting to see how.
Andrew Runton, is it Andrew Runton? I think it is. But I'll check and okay. Send you.
Because how do museums know about these pieces and how are they presenting them? And the whole thing about museums, following on after last week, is a really, really important important one. Because it's interesting, in the National Museum, there's an artifact that a Jamaican friend of mine says is from Jamaica, but Welsh people think it's a horse's head. Mary
Llwyd.
Yeah. But when my Jamaican friend saw it, he said, no, it's part of the Joncanoe Festival activities. So that made the link across. But it probably is Mary Llwyd, more likely than the Jamaican link there. Anyway, that's really interesting. I'm just looking down at all my notes here and seeing what else. So it's so interesting that he took this job. So where do you think he got the equivalent of £52,000 from to put in as a bond?
It looks as though he had a couple of friends in London who sort of put the money up for him. Yeah. One of them was another Davis, and again, there's another interesting sort of research lead. Really, did he have family in London as well, possibly in the legal business? who may have been doing some work for the East India Company. You know, it's all these different sort of networks that this one man seems to have had.
Yes, and it is interesting because so many Welsh people were in London, so that
Yeah,
would make a lot of sense,
absolutely.
couldn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And also you made the link with the Powys, the Herberts from Powys Castle, and that's interesting because again,
I mean, again, that's all speculation, really. I mean, we do know that in the 1650s, quite a lot of English, Welsh went over to Barbados in the aftermath of the Civil War. A lot of Irish went over too. And the assumption is that these were refugees, royalist refugees, who may have lost their land during the Civil War or were escaping possible retribution. And they went out to Barbados. And it's interesting, the will itself, the list of names, there are so many colonels, captains, majors in the list, which again suggests a kind of a semi-military society. You know, all these people who've been fighting a civil war in England, then legged it over to Barbados.
The period of the Parliament that they went over before the period of the Commonwealth, it was called, wasn't it?
The interregnum started in 1649. And as I said, we know that Thomas Davis was there. He was in Barbados by 1651 and had obviously established himself by then because he was standing as witness in another will of another plantation owner, you know, so.
Oh, it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And fascinating that, you know, you've really got your teeth into this and having, though, got your background and your skills, you've been actually able to do this research very well. Whereas for people who are interested, but they haven't got this knowledge, it's how we can support people to do that. Oh, I'm just going to say hello to Professor Sati. I've just realized you've joined us. Lovely to see you. Okay, so that's a really interesting story that we've had there. Now, what we're going to, are there any other questions or points? Just checking round. No, that's fine. So thank you very much indeed for that. I'm very interested in the cloth that you've got that was going out there. What they wanted all these old sheets from Belgium for, I don't know. But sometimes terms don't mean the same thing. So whatever they were is interesting. I'm also interested in the fact that you say carpets. Now, there's a carpet museum in Kidderminster. I come from Kidderminster. So it would be really interesting to find out what they know about the export of carpets.
That is interesting, yes. I just assumed the carpets were coming from India. But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah,
there might be, but there might be Kidderminster carpets because Kidderminster's near Shrewsbury, so all this Welsh plains tough wool that's suitable for making carpets would have been going out that way. So that's something else for us to investigate. Oh, we're never going to be bored, are we, with all these? And somebody who certainly isn't bored at the moment is Dr. Bunmi Oyesan. Welcome to you. You've gone invisible again, Bunmi. I have to say, you couldn't do your curtains again, could you? Because you did wonderful work just now and shut out all that glorious sunshine that you've got in Canada. And now we can see you better. That's lovely. So Bunmi, would you like to put on your microphone, please? And hello, Norbert. Haven't said hello to Norbert before. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Oh yeah, my microphone is okay. Yeah, thanks. So really enjoying it. I got another meeting and it's my pleasure. Really.
Lovely. We're going to catch up with you in a minute because we need to be planning the celebration events that you and Chief Thomas were talking about with us. Right, back to you, Bunmi, then. So
yeah, I'm going to be able to share my screen.
Okay.
Do
you want to share the screen?
You can share the screen, Bunmi. It's
okay.
Right. So in my nighttime exploration of YouTube, which I find all kinds of interesting things, I came across the Sankova Pan-African series. Which intrigued me. when I contacted Dr. Bunley to ask her about what she was doing, you started to explain to me. So, Dr. Bunley, would you like to explain? You're a well-known author from Nigeria. At this present moment in time, you're in Canada, but you've been very busy, almost on a daily basis, putting out episodes for the Sankofa Pan-African series, and they're all so interesting. So can you tell us, how did this all come about? And tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh, well, this is catching me unawares. I'm originally from Nigeria, but I'm also a Canadian citizen. I've lived here for a number of years, and but actually live in both places because I run 2 local schools in Lagos, Nigeria, for children from low-income families. And then, but it's interesting. I've always loved history. Even as a child, my maternal grandmother entertained me with stories that I actually thought she had made up. But as I grew older, I realized she was actually telling me bits of history. Her family were originally from Republic of Benin, so she was from Dahomey, and then they settled in Nigeria, and she had all kinds of stories about Dahomey, the women warriors, and all of that. So that when I started learning history in school, it was very different from what I'd learned from my grandmother. So that always got me curious. That always got me questioning. And so it's been a lifelong passion. And then during this pandemic, I decided that to keep myself busy, to start this YouTube channel. I actually started it in March last year. My husband happens to be a film maker, and I'd had some experience with making series for television, films in Nigeria, and actually my PhD was actually in gender and film studies. And so we just decided, we have a basement here that we turned into a studio, and that's how this series started. So what I try to do with the Sankofa Pan-African series is to challenge the kind of history I was taught in school, which was mostly imperial history, by looking into other sources to question some of the things I had been taught, and then to put the information that I have out there to share with others. So the episode I'm hoping to show today, if I can figure out how to share it on my screen, is on the decline of Africa's golden age, because Africa did have a period of golden age before things started going south. Yeah, so that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, well, you fiddle around and get that set up so that we can watch that. It'll take about 20 minutes, and then we'll still have some time for further conversation.
Okay, so
but then,
so I share. Yeah, I don't know why it's not coming up as
You there, Simon?
I'm here. You just need normally to click on the share screen button at the bottom of the Zoom screen.
And then
you should see the options to share screen or to share a particular.
I've opened sharing preference.
No, you don't need to touch sharing preference normally. You just click on the share screen.
Oh, okay, so share screen.
Yeah.
The video is under, but it's not coming up.
If you just click the share screen button.
Okay, I have clicked share.
Okay, and then click, it should give you share screen.
When I clicked on share, it gives me, allow Zoom to share your screen.
Yep, click on that.
It's when I click on that it says open system preference.
Okay, what are you using, Windows or Mac?
Mac, I'm using Mac.
Okay, it might be slightly different on Mac, but normally if you click share screen. What
I could also do is, can I quickly put the URL on the
If you put it in the chat box, I'll open it and
then
share it.
you can open,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm doing that right now.
Okay.
Oops, a daisy. Managed to disappear, you all. Right, okay, so while Bunmi's just doing that then, so I'll just go back to the point I was making right at the beginning of this session. That is,
yeah, I've got it, Bunmi.
Okay, thanks.
good. And that is that we want to see how people have been researching Black history. Right, so we've got the link there. So any of you want to cut and paste that or copy and paste that, you'll be able to look at this on your own system later.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen in the meanwhile.
Simon's going to share it and then we'll get a chance. Ah, it's looking hopeful, Simon.
Right, are you ready to watch?
Yeah,
All right. A must watch, the decline of the African golden age. Right, okay then.
Okay, here we go.
Brilliant. Right, thank you, Simon. Simon, can you turn the volume up?
Yep.
I'm not doing well hearing it, Simon. Can you hear it, Bunmi?
No, I can't.
Okay, I'm going to try and fix that.
Okay. All right. Richest man in Africa. Excellent. I've been reading up quite a lot following up his story. Right, let's have another go at this then.
Yep.
I actually published a children's book about Mansa Musa.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, a book for children.
Okay, I've got my volume now set to maximum, so that's going to be the best I can do.
All right then.
But I'll give it another go.
Oh, right, there we are.
Right, here we go.
Can you put it back to the beginning?
Okay, how's the volume now?
What's called?
Do you want to turn on the YouTube volume as well? Sometimes they.
Yeah, I've also got it to the maximum.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's
so,
weird.
They're all a bit mysterious, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So I've got both computer volume and YouTube volume at maximum. So.
Right, well, it may be that we can't actually, we could watch it, but we can't hear it. So what I'm interested in is the screen that we're looking at now, Dr. Bunmi, is that we've got your African history series listed down there. Do you have any particular way of, well, you've got numbers down the side. Was number one the first one you ever did?
Yes, number one should be the first one I ever did, yeah.
All right, okay. So, well, people can have a look at this and then we can come back to you if you're able to join us again. Obviously, next week, it would be good when people have had a chance to see it.
Yes.
Because it doesn't look like we're going to get the volume.
Yeah.
I haven't had any problems and I binge watch some of the sessions. And one of the things that I find really interesting is that you can't, you know, because it's on YouTube, you can either watch it again or you can go back because you want to hear the bit that's just been said again. And I don't know if it's to do with my age or my intellectual incapacities, but I find that really, really useful because I find it quite a struggle to take in information in a way that I can remember and to share with other people. So that's good. Okay then. So right, back to you then, Dr. Bunmi. So you set about doing this. Yeah. How many episodes do you reckon you have recorded so far?
You know, I've never actually stopped to count because what we also, since the African History Month this year, we actually got requests from people who wanted us to post every day and people who kind of subscribed late. So we started posting every day. And so what we do is one day we post a new episode, and then the next day we repost an episode that we had done before that people hadn't seen. So so now we have a mix of one new episode. So we alternate one new episode, then we repost an old one, and then go back to a new one. And so we, on average, we post about between 3 or 4 new episodes every week, and then we rerun the old one.
Right. So just so, because I've never caught on to this bit, where do you post them? So how can you
them on YouTube?
You post them on YouTube?
Yes.
Okay.
And do you get a reminder coming through on your email or your messenger or something?
If you have when you subscribe to our channel, you click on the bell, you'll be notified when we have an episode up.
Mm-hmm. Liz, I've got the sound fixed, by the way.
Oh,
okay, brilliant.
So
well, that's great. So we'll go over and listen to it. But I'm really interested because I've subscribed, but I never got reminders. So
because you click on
the bell.
The announcement.
Right. Are you sitting comfortably, everybody?
Good. Now let's begin.
Okay then. Let's see if we've got the sound this time. Ah, lovely. I love this music.
A friend of mine made it.
Good. You pick up more music.
Hi. One interesting fact about African history is that while Africa was enjoying its golden age, Europe was encountering a general downturn in productivity and economic growth. Welcome to the Sankofa Pan-African series. Before we find out more about this topic, please subscribe to this channel if you've not yet done so. Thank you. I know that it is possible to look at the way that someone like Mansa Musa drew undue attention to himself when he went on pilgrimage to Mecca, and the amount of gold that he spent there and in other places like Egypt on his way to and from Mecca. And some people might look at this and say, maybe if he had not done so, Africa might not have attracted undue attention to its wealth. However, that position is rather simplistic. The truth of the matter is that countries in Europe were desperate. It was a case of find resources to pillage elsewhere or perish. The 14th century was a period of major famines and crises in the agricultural sector in Europe. From about 1320, there was a famine every 10 years. Fields used for grazing and planting were affected by serious climatic changes, and so yielded very little, and soon they became abandoned. Food became scarce, and then epidemics such as black plague, typhoid, dysentery, smallpox, etc., hit populations periodically between 1313 and 1348. There was therefore an increase in mortality and a drop in birth rates. Citizens grappled with very poor standards of living, with limited nutrition and several health problems. So these conditions in Europe were to have dire effects on the rest of the world, especially continents like Asia and Africa, which had and still have rich resources. So most monarchs in Europe who had been looking for sources of wealth invested more in mercenaries who have now become canonized, in history as explorers. These mercenaries were prepared to risk their lives looking for wealth in these two continents as well as in the New World. So with the wealth they found and bestowed on their monarchs, these mercenaries then bought respectability. So also, based on the information provided by these mercenaries when they visited these continents, these so-called explorers, other people from Europe then started exploring and migrating to colonize other continents in order to find the wealth with which they then improved life in their own home countries. One thing which I find very disturbing and which we should all pay attention to is that as I continue to research this period in history, the irony of how migration has become so highly criminalized and politicized, so much so that a man like Donald Trump got elected based on a half-brained plan to stem immigration is just very puzzling. We now have a situation in which, first, although there is lip service paid to giving preference to migrants who are war refugees, others who embark on migration as a result of economic hardship are criminalized if they don't end up dying during the perilous journeys or practically ending up enslaved. Now, this irony is driven home when one realizes that migration is a natural part of human life. Europeans, during periods in their history when life was unsustainable on that continent, saw the need to and were able to migrate in order to improve their circumstances. So while I'm not advocating that Africans and people from other continents should be given free rein in the developed world and that everybody should just open their borders and let everybody in so that they don't become overwhelmed, I believe attempts to stem the current tide of migration must prioritize the rights of human beings, to economic survival and free movement. Why is there such little effort to address the huge and widening economic gaps between countries? How do we justify a world in which cats and dogs in some parts of the world are better fed than human children in other parts of the same world? Why are we so reluctant to link the fact that young men and women will risk drowning in desperate bids to migrate to lack of economic equity, social justice, lack of job opportunities, and other factors? We must link these factors. Anyway, going back to the decline of Africa's golden age, as a result of continued contact with the Arabs and later Europeans, Africa witnessed fundamental changes. Foreign trade partners worked persistently to establish themselves by developing relationships with the ruling hierarchies in Africa. Mostly, they did this by fueling and exploiting ethnic and religious divisions. Old rivalries and hostilities were inflamed or revived. As such, state structures were gradually destroyed by the violence in the form of skirmishes, ambushes, kidnappings. These all kept flaring up, leading to insecurity and fear. The ruling classes quickly saw that there was profit to be made from selling slaves, to their foreign allies. Initially, the trade in slaves was dominated by Arabs, but Europeans swooned in. The ruling classes got so befuddled by either the newfound religions of their foreign allies or the equally intoxicating guns and sometimes real alcohol, which they got in exchange for their fellow Africans. Their victims were mostly captured during wars or sometimes simply classified as criminals with often trumped up charges. Wherever the ruling classes got into partnerships with foreign exploiters, traditional laws and customs broke down and the abuse of power became the order of the day. In a few cases, the economy might seem to boom temporarily, but generally the economy stagnated and then human resources were wasted as the foreign invaders kept extracting resources, to take to their countries. Human beings were carted away to work and develop other economies, just as minerals and other natural resources were carried away. The ruling classes of Africa were so debauched by their alliance with their foreign exploiters that they did not even see that they were selling their people and resources for dirt. The currencies that were introduced, that first the Arabs replaced trade by barter for actual goods, which was the way in which Africa used to trade. So the Arabs replaced the trade by barter for actual goods with cowrie shells and other worthless shells. The Europeans then topped this by introducing other currencies like the manila and other valueless currencies. So as far as Africa is concerned, neither the Muslim Arabs nor the European Christians ever had any intention or interest that was not self-serving in Africa. Once again, thanks for being a part of the Sankofa Pan-African series. We will continue with other empires which emerged in West Africa before moving eastwards in subsequent episodes. Meanwhile, please don't forget to send me your questions. I'd particularly like to find out what you think Africa, and indeed the world, would be like today if Africa had not been so badly exploited, pillaged, and colonized. Try and imagine what Europe, the US, and other parts of the American continent would be like without the human beings and natural resources that were stolen from Africa to develop those places. Send your comments on this and to send your comments on this to our community page. See you next time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, thanks, Simon. Then, so if we just go back to normal. Dr. Bundy, that was fabulous. Very, very wise words. And normally the picture isn't jumpy like that, is it? No, it's normally just normal.
Yeah.
But well done, Simon, for making it possible for us to see that. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Okay, so I think we need to talk about the content of that episode. I find it fascinating. One of the things that we're trying to do is for people to tell their own history, and to hear European history told by somebody from Nigeria. I found quite fascinating, because I even learned about our own history, never mind about our own foreign exploiters. So questions, anyone, points anyone to raise? I think one of the things that I feel is that you need to have a timeline of the dates so that you can sort of work out what was going on and when. But certainly those years when after Britain had been invaded by the Normans, the 1066, that's about the only date that sticks in my head. Then those were difficult times, because then you had the powerful and then you had the people, and I think that's a whole conversation to have again. And interesting that you know you're so clear in your research. You found out about the challenges that Europeans faced with the Black Plague, the Black Death, I would call it, the plague, on typhus and all those other horrible illnesses that probably took with them when they went other places. But yeah, fascinating. So has anybody else got anything that you want to discuss with? Oh, hello, Lisa. That you want to discuss with Dr. Bundy?
I was just going to say what a different perspective it is, because we're taught these stories as if the people who went out there were some kind of heroes, you know, the Crusades and all these other things. To hear it from the African perspective is very different. And it's good to hear that, to give a more balanced view. It's not the history that we were taught.
Which is why we need as many voices looking at history and putting out various perspectives there, you know, so that there's a clearer, like I said, the history I was taught in school was all about the Roman Empire, the Greek. I was not even taught about Egypt as a civilization. And I went to school in Africa, you know, and also, so they go from Greek to the Romans, and then Western civilization, and then on to the colonial history of Africa. And that was it, you know. Like I said, thank God for my maternal grandmother, who kind of kindled an interest in an alternative, you know, kind of history that made me question, okay, so why am I not learning about Queen Amina or the Minnows of Dahomey, the women warriors, you know, and that got me thinking, and got me reading outside of the recommended history text, which is what I'm hoping this channel will do for people. It will get people curious. They don't have to believe everything I say. I actually love it when people challenge me, and then, in fact, I've had viewers send me alternative versions of the history I've told, you know, so that we've kind of been able to, it's been a back and forth kind of exercise.
But I think what is important is the bullet point you are making, or you are putting, because as you said, when from the Congo, for example, you will not learn in school, for example, the story of what King Leopold II agent did in the Congo. It's not in our history. So while really, and what you did really by picking up what you learned from your grandmother is interesting, because myself, I remember I was 5 or 6 when I was listening my great-great-mother singing a song, and I remember this song till now. That means when you go in the forest, you face the leopards there. And when you come back in the village, you have the soldiers of Leopold II waiting for you. So which kind of life? But I learned this song, I was 4 or 5, but no one explained to me what that song means till when when I was 30, I met with a Belgian scholar who was doing research in my father's village. And then I learned all the story of what happened in this area during, the red rubber. So I think it's important, even if you have a lot of aversion. And I think what we need to do now is to resume, and I agree with you, I like when you use the term Pan-Africanism, because in around the 1930s or 1940s, when the first Black scholars arrived in Paris, and then they connected, it seems to be much more connected than we are now, because those who were in Paris, they were connected to those who was in London, and the Pan-Africanism started there. Even Aimé Césaire, who came from Martinique, created the Negritude. He was writing about those ladies soldier of the Dahomey, the king of Dahomey. What we never learn in our history book. And just to, for example, we are learning about the human rights, whatever, but who is telling us the story of the shot of the Manding? Or about this guy from Ghana who in the 16th century became a professor in philosophy in German, a more affair. So I think all those bullet points are very, very important, and then it will help us really to dig more. And the beautiful part of the history, the oral history, is that you have all those versions and you need to put them together. We learn, for example, the story of the Masada, which the Jews Masada against the Roman. But the same happens in Senegal with the ladies often there who resist against the Arab slave trade. And at the end of the day, after fighting for one day, they decided to immolate themselves instead of being slaves. But who is telling about those stories? So I think the job you are doing is interesting, even if sometimes you will receive, the opposite version, and we need to put all those versions together.
Yes, yes. And with the help of people like you, I'm not a repository of all the knowledge, or so I welcome. If you have sources like that you want to share with me, I would love, to have you on as a guest, or if you don't want to come up as a guest, share your resources. And the idea is to put them out there in a way that people who may never darken the doors of a university will also have access to this history. My master's research was in oral tradition, so I have a lot of respect for it. And when I'm doing history, I don't only depend on what's in books. Like when I was doing the story of the history of Mali, or even the Yoruba and all of that, I look into what they've carried along from generation to generation as part of their oral culture. And then I also provide the written version, so that we know that we do not have to be academics to engage in history. My maternal grandmother was no academic, but she was just someone who loved telling stories,
I think that's fantastic. And I think it's not necessarily that we darken the doors of the universities, but some of us aren't fortunate enough to. But then there's this very interesting other way that histories are told, and I think that's what we're going to be exploring. So Professor Satie, welcome. Would you like to come in now?
Yeah, thank you very much. I've missed this community for quite some time now. I'm quite...
Oh, we were having our Easter holidays, so you needn't worry about that. We've only been back for a week. We looked at Benin last week. Professor Satie, I'm finding it difficult to hear you.
So you can hear me?
Just about.
Can you hear me?
Just about. Not very well. Talk a bit more and then we'll know.
Professor Satie, can you say something?
I think Professor Satie's frozen.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Right. Well, when you come back, Professor Satie, we'll join you in straight away. I'll keep my eye out.
Yeah.
Jim, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. I just want to say Dr. Bonnie answered to a question.
Bumi's fine, by the way. Bumi's fine.
All right. Good,
Yes.
good.
And the answer to the question of what should we do, I think her words were, we need to come together and share our story and work together. And what I've taken from her contribution, which is excellent, enslavement didn't start in Africa. It's very old in terms of human civilization, but the cruelty of the chattel slave in Africa was a particular type of cruelty. And we need to look at that in a way, and I like the way she explained the role the Arab played and the surrogates of the colonialists and imperialists. But what our speaker has said is so relevant. I come from an East Indian background. And although indentureship was an extension of this enslavement of the African people when labor becomes scarce, that story told that happened in Africa, the transportation, exploitation of people and their resources and the way they've been treated has been replicated in slightly different ways in Asia, in Latin America. I mean, look at the mass killing in South America, what the Spanish and British and Portuguese and others did. Not necessarily chattel slavery, but the kind of working people to death. They're expendable, don't feed them, work them until they die, get new people in. So I totally agree with Dr. Burmi that we've got to come together. Some of my concern as a historian and an author is that the new technology has opened up our world to information, easily accessible information and our history. And many of us are fighting our own little corner. We're fighting our own tiny little corner. And that has been the weakness in educating generations of people and establishing education of slavery, imperialism, and colonialism in our everyday classes around the world. We have become ownership of tiny bits of information, putting our own little tribe, race, ethnicity first, and very often not seeing the whole story. Because when the whole story, we see it, it involves everybody, whether you're East Indian origin, Australian, the New Zealand Maoris, Africans from wherever you come, our story and our history and our lives, even the Arabs in the early years, not all Arabs were slavers. They were also expendable. The class, the power of imperialism, the ruling class. So I would love to, I could listen to Dr. Burmi for years and years and years. You
can.
You are a sister. I love you and I respect you. I would like to share what I have with you. And I know you're generous and you'll share what you have.
Yes.
I'm an educationalist. I'm a trade unionist. I'm a community campaigner. And I feel very isolated. I work hard to gather information. I try to even impose it on people, say, for God's sake, take this. It's free. But as long as you look at it and share it, pass it on. And that
Jim, you are absolutely fabulous. And I'm just going to ask you to stick a pin because Professor Satie's got his link again now. Right. So hold on to your points and let's just hear from you, Professor Satie.
Thank you very much. I hope the connection doesn't break this time around.
Beautiful.
I want to thank Dr. Burmi for her presentation. For me as a historian, I find it quite interesting. really revives the Africanist historiography that tries to place the African voice on the table of discourse rather than placing the non-African voice in African history. So to that extent, quite interesting. But at the level of basic education, these points are still there. The points you raise are still there. But at the point of higher education in Africa, most of the curriculum has transited and is actually presenting the Africanist perspective. But for those in Europe and other climes, I believe that what she's saying is really important for people there to know. And this is because the books we write here hardly get known to people outside Africa. So the handshake across the Atlantic, the intellectual handshake is still very weak. So we write here and we consume here, you write there and you consume there. If this handshake is not broken, much of the knowledge we have here can hardly get there. So people like Dr. Bumi are really doing very well to present what we do know here to the outside world. And what she said is important because when I was in primary school in the early 70s, even though people like DK and his people who had tried to decolonize African historiography by placing the African voice at the table of discourse, at the lower levels, such knowledge was really not known. In my primary school days, some of their songs were Pussycat, Pussycat, where have you been? I've been to London to see the Queen. And I have never been to London until I went to New York in 2001. So, but I was singing Pussycat, Pussycat, where have you been? I've been to London to see the Queen in the 70s when so much had changed at the level of the university. But lower level. I love what she is saying, so that people at the lower level can also understand that history is not just about what other people say about one, but what one says about themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I shall never hear Pussycat, Pussycat sung again without thinking
Goosey, Goosey Gander?
So thank you so much. That was wonderful, Professor Satie. I think what I'll do now, if it's all right, everyone, I will just wrap up, but then we can carry on talking for a few minutes after we stop recording. So I say a formal thank you to you, Bunmi, good friend from Canada at the moment. Some of us are caught in places in the world we didn't expect. Thank you. Round of applause going on all round for you, Bunmi. And people are going to be not only clicking on share, but they click on the bell as well, because some of us don't know about that element of the technology. All right, then. And a big thank you to John Evans as well. And thank you all of you for joining us this week. But hang on, we can carry on talking. Okay, thanks, Simon.